We've looked at the relationships of Disney princesses, so now it's time to do the same for Disney's mini villains. While we don't think about them nearly as much as their more heroic counterparts, the alliances of Disney's dastardly villains can take on many different shapes. The majority of them take on the form of a villain and their trusty sidekick, while others are connected by family. But out of all these relationships, which ones are the least toxic and which ones would shock even the most fearsome of villains? Yo, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and this is Disney Villain Relationships, toxic to most toxic. For today's video, we'll be starting off with the least toxic relationships before working our way down to the most toxic. For our least toxic villain relationship, we have to give Ursula and the Eels the respect they deserve. Though being the least toxic isn't exactly what we call a great honor, the trio of Ursula, Flotsam, and Jetsam deserve it nonetheless. Flotsam and Jetsam serve the designated role of evil sidekick to Ursula in The Little Mermaid, and it's a role they play well. While a lot of sidekicks tend to get on the nerves of their master, Ursula maintains a pretty good bond with the Eels. They obey her every command, and they usually succeed at completing whatever task she gives them. They lure Ariel to Ursula, and later in the movie, intervene when it looks like she's about to kiss Eric. The main reason we hold them in high regard, however, is because of what happens when the Eels are killed. Ursula is visibly saddened and enraged by their deaths, making it quite possibly the only time in a Disney movie where the villain legitimately felt sorry for their lackey. While the Eels don't get much of anything in terms of characterization, we can tell that they care for Ursula, just like she cared for them. That's a lot more than you can say for a lot of the characters on this list, and for this reason, more than any, we have to give these sea creatures the very first spot on the list. In second place is another Renaissance-era pairing. This time, it's Jafar and Iago from Aladdin. It's another villain and sidekick relationship. Jafar doesn't look at Iago quite as fondly as Ursula did her eels, but the two still enjoy each other's company. Iago is fiercely loyal to Jafar, and Jafar sees him as a worthy accomplice in his quest to become the Sultan. We're sure this has a lot to do with Iago actually being pretty competent when it comes to sidekicks.
Oh, in the head!
When Iago is sent by Jafar to retrieve the lamp near the film's conclusion, the parrot successfully gets it. Iago also has Jafar's back during the big climax. While Jafar and Iago seem to think similarly about many things, they do have their troubles. Jafar acts rather abusive towards Iago when he starts to annoy them, an element of their relationship that would later lead to Iago's ultimate betrayal in the sequel, Return of Jafar. While we won't be taking the direct-to-video sequels into account, mostly because of how few villains there are that get to return for a second movie, that alone should show you how toxic most relationships are between villains. Like, we're only on the second set of characters and they're already abusing each other. While Jafar and Iago might have one of the better teams in the world of Disney villains, they got a long way to go before becoming truly healthy. Next, we have Gaston and Lefou from Beauty and the Beast. While they effectively act as the villain and sidekick of the film, their bond is a bit different than most of these pairings. Lefou is more of a fanboy for Gaston than a straight sidekick, and Lefou appears a lot smarter than his burly counterpart. Lefou is the one that ends up questioning several of Gaston's ideas.
So, how'd it go?
For example, he points out that there's no way Belle would go along with marrying Gaston. Gaston, however, does not take lightly a lot of what Lefou has to say, which usually results in Lefou being punched or tossed around. In a way, you could say that Gaston and Lefou's relationship is a bit on the love and hate side of things. They usually get along well, but they can get on each other's nerves. Lefou might not say something that is to Gaston's liking, and this almost always earns him some sort of physical abuse. Still, through all their disagreements, Lefou is unquestionably loyal to Gaston. He believes he's the manliest man out there, and he's involved with pretty much every step of Gaston's plan. So, while the relationship definitely isn't ideal in the annals of Disney villain history, theirs looks like one of the greats. Over in Neverland, we're looking at Captain Hook and Mr. Smee from Peter Pan. This is the first relationship we're looking at when it's an angry villain and a bumbling sidekick, a common villain-sidekick archetype found in Disney movies. While the earlier ones were at least on an even playing field, Hook and Smee have a very one-sided relationship. Smee is a kind soul, while Hook is loud and boisterous. It's no wonder that these two personalities clash so often. Mr. Smee is laser focused on making his captain happy, and he's unquestionably loyal to him as a member of his crew. Hook, unfortunately, is nowhere near as nice to him. He calls on him to do every single one of his biddings, but he's almost never happy. Captain Hook has a huge temper, and Smee tends to see the worst of it. This leads to a relationship where Smee fears Captain Hook, which, for as non-ideal as the previous pairings were, you never got the sense the sidekicks were all that afraid of the villain. Mr. Smee is a talented pirate, but if this crew member wants to thrive, he'd best find the new captain to follow. Next is a fan favorite, Isma and Krog from The Emperor's New Groove. Like Hook and Smee, this pairing is one-sided and completely in the villain's favor. Isma sees Krog as nothing but her lackey, but while it could be argued that Mr. Smee did bring Captain Hook at least a modicum of happiness, Krog is a lot more bumbling than he is sidekick. He fails to poison Cusco, fails to successfully dispose of his body, so what does he do right? Well, nothing in Isma's eyes, yet she still maintains a level of dependence on him, a fact which she describes as a cruel irony. Even so, she eventually can't tolerate his buffoonery any longer and describes how much he annoys her. She even disparages his cooking. This prompts Krog to turn on her, which goes to show how rough their relationship is. As bad as some of these other villains were to their sidekicks, at least they stuck with them to the end. Krog chooses not to, and this leads directly to Isma's defeat in the climax. Besides, she didn't like his spinach puffs. That, more than anything else, is truly unforgivable. Next, we have Lady Tremaine and the Wicked Stepsisters from Cinderella. Lady Tremaine might treat her stepdaughter badly, but she doesn't do Anastasia and Drizella much better. She essentially uses them as tools, operatives that can deal out the punishment she wishes to inflict on Cinderella. While Drizella and Anastasia actually rip up Cinderella's outfit, don't forget that it was their mother who instructed them to do so. More than anything, Lady Tremaine craves power. She's a socialite and wants her daughters to marry a prince, not because she thinks it's best for them, but because it will better her social standing. She trains them to be as proper as can be and becomes angry when they fail her. Anastasia and Drizella do their best to please her, and do some pretty heinous things to accomplish this, but it's never enough. Even Isma saw some value in Krog. While prior pairings were simply toxic relationships between villains and their sidekicks, this is also a toxic family structure. The main reason they aren't any lower on our list is that other groups of this type are just a lot worse than this trio. But don't let that fool you for a second. This is one family you don't want to mess with. Alright, starting to get really interesting. Now it's Madame Medusa and Mr. Snoops from The Rescuers. This relationship is intriguing because while it looks like another villain and a bumbling sidekick on the surface, their attitude is more confrontational than any thus far. Throughout the movie, Medusa detests Snoops, and he cannot stand her. Madame Medusa berates Snoops for failing to find the diamond, and again for letting the girl Penny slip through his fingers. Mr. Snoops tries his best to please her, but he's frustrated with Medusa for always yelling at him.
What is your alibi this time, nitwit?
He's also not too fond of her crocodiles. Really, the moment that best showcases how dysfunctional they are is the ending. As the diamond becomes Medusa's, Snoops argues that his contributions to finding the diamond means he deserves his equal share. Madame Medusa isn't interested in sharing, however, and tries to keep it as hers only. Eventually, she loses a diamond, prompting Snoops to try and take it for himself. The whole sequence is indicative of their entire relationship. While other pairings bonded over their goals, Medusa and Snoops are more like angry coworkers. Perhaps if they'd gotten along better, the diamond would have been theirs. It's time to talk about Commander Rourke and Helga Sinclair from Atlantis. Coming from the lost city of Atlantis, this is another relationship where the cracks are particularly evident during the movie's end. Before this point, Rourke and Helga actually seem to have a pretty positive link, as far as villains go. Helga is one of Rourke's most trusted agents, and near the end, she's the only major crew member who sticks with Rourke. However, when the Atlanteans battle their mercenaries, they desperately try to lighten the load of their Zeppelin, prompting Rourke to toss Helga off.
You said we were in this together!
While he successfully does this, Helga retaliates by firing on the Zeppelin, indirectly leading to Rourke's death moments later. As bad as previous Disney villain relationships got, at least none of them got each other killed. We also feel this moment shows how Rourke has one of the more evil mindsets of the villains we've looked at. Kinda like Lady Tremaine from earlier, Rourke sees everyone around him as tools who carry out his mission. While they're no longer of use to him, they can be easily disposed of. This alliance could potentially be even lower, but unfortunately, we don't get that much in the way of interactions between them. Nevertheless, this might be the best example yet of a relationship where their greatest enemies are each other. Next, we have Bowler Hat Guy and Doris from Meet the Robinsons. These villains are another unique pair among their counterparts. While a villain throwing their sidekick under the bus is nothing too out of the ordinary, this movie might be the only notable instance of a sidekick who betrayed the villain in a Disney movie. Or at least, it's depending on who you see as a sidekick. You see, the Bowler Hat Guy, formerly known as Goob, had a deep hatred for Cornelius Robinson.
I just want to ruin your life.
This was something that Doris shared with him, being a forgotten creation of his. As a result of their common enemy, they teamed up. But in reality, Doris was merely using Goob so her plans for world domination could come to fruition. After they successfully arrive in the past, Doris quickly gets to work taking over the entire world, much to the dismay of Goob. It's even suggested that Doris killed Goob shortly after beginning her conquest, but before the timeline was again changed. This is another example of a toxic relationship that ultimately led to one of the villains destroying the other. In a way, you could argue that Doris fed Goob's worst desires, entertaining his dream of ruining Cornelius's life merely for the purpose of seeing her own dream come true. Doris took advantage of Goob in a way no villain up to this point has, so we have to give them this spot on our list. Alright, we're heading over to the Pride Lands. Next is Scar and the Hyenas from The Lion King. At a glance, Scar's relationship with Shinzi, Banzai, and Ed seems to resemble the classic competent villain, incompetent sidekick trope we see a lot in the Disney canon. The Hyenas aren't exactly smart, and Scar knows it all too well. However, their relationship takes a darker turn after Scar takes over the Pride Lands. Scar is not a good leader, as evidenced by how poor the land looks under his rule. His poor leadership extends even worse to the Hyenas, who were promised to never go hungry again after he becomes king.
It's dinner time, and we ain't got no stinking entrees!
Obviously, that didn't come to pass. The Hyenas even believed that things might have been better when Mufasa was in charge, a comment that greatly angers Scar. Scar's horrible treatment of the Hyenas reaches its peak when he attempts to blame Mufasa's death on the Hyenas, causing them to betray him. Yet again, we have a relationship that's so toxic, it leads to a character being betrayed. But this might be the most violent instance yet. It's heavily implied that the Hyenas ripped Scar to shreds, which shows you how horribly he treated them. This isn't the first relationship that ended in betrayal, but the fact it ends in such a violent way shows that Scar treated his sidekicks just as badly as he did all the animals in the Pride Lands. While other villains showed some care for their underlings or ultimately disposed of them to save their own skins, Scar never cared in any meaningful way for the Hyenas, earning them this spot on the list. Next, we have Mother Gothel and Rapunzel from Tangled. Unlike our previous entries, which were all groups of villains, our final slots go down to villains and their respective heroes. These are already the most toxic on account of how there is a clear power imbalance in favor of the villain. So it's just a game of which hero had the very worst treatment. In Rapunzel's case, she's taken as a baby by Gothel, who begins to use her magic hair for her own gain. As time goes on, Rapunzel grows into a young adult, but Mother Gothel is incredibly overprotective of her. This isn't born out of a desire to keep her safe, but only so that she can stay young forever. Besides forcing her to live in one building her entire life, she's also made Rapunzel dependent on her, and she'll pin the blame on her for anything that goes wrong in her life. When Rapunzel finally learns of her true parentage, Mother Gothel chains her to a wall, showing how unrelenting she is in making sure Rapunzel stays with her.
Now look what you've done, Rapunzel.
In the end, Rapunzel has to give up her hair altogether, as it's the only thing that will end Mother Gothel's wrath for good. This, of course, doesn't end too well for Gothel, but it does grant Rapunzel her independence. Between the misuse of Rapunzel's gifts and Gothel's abuse, we can't see any other relationship thus far that's as toxic as this mother and daughter. The bronze medal of toxicity goes to Pinocchio and Stromboli from the classic Pinocchio. This pair is very one-sided. Stromboli is a puppeteer who enlists Pinocchio to join the show. At first, things seem alright. Pinocchio's show earns Stromboli money, and he promises he'll make the wooden boy famous.
I will push you in the public's eye.
However, upon hearing that Pinocchio wishes to return to Geppetto's for the day, his true colors are finally shown. He becomes enraged, locking him in a cage and yelling that Pinocchio only belongs to him. And what will become of him when he becomes too old? He'll be turned into firewood, of course. While this relationship isn't explored much in the actual film, it's one of the more horrible things you'd hear between any of the characters on our list. While Gothel might have been horrible over a longer stretch of time, you can at least argue she masked it under the idea she was doing what was right. Stromboli is only interested in making money, and he makes sure Pinocchio is aware that he's easily disposable. Pinocchio is left feeling trapped in a way no other character has on the list, and for that reason, we put it as one of the lowest. The silver medal of toxicity goes to the evil queen and Snow White. It seems only fitting that the first villain relationship ends up as one of the lowest on our list. The evil queen is a vain and jealous figure. She wants nothing more than to be the fairest of the land. So naturally, the reveal that this title belongs to Snow White greatly upsets her.
Bring back her heart.
Even before this, the queen really hated Snow. She forces her to work as a servant in the castle, complete in worn-down rags. She tries several times to kill Snow White, from a huntsman to gifting her a poisonous apple in a disguise. Snow White seems oblivious to the queen's disdain for her, making the relationship look like a more toxic version of what transpired between Rapunzel and Mother Gothel. The queen's attempt on Snow's life almost works. Only true love's kiss saves Snow White from certain death. While there have been moms on this list who haven't treated their children well, none of them tried to outright poison them. There's just one duo that outdoes every other in terms of toxicity. And judging from these last few, you might just know who they are. In first place, we have to give the gold medal of toxicity to Frollo and Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. We can't see any other set of characters earning the title of most toxic when they're up against this one. In the opening flashback, Frollo kills Quasimodo's mother and tries to drop the infant down a well on account of his deformities. He ultimately spares the child, giving him the cruel name of Quasimodo. As he grows into an adult, Quasimodo is taught to see himself as a monster who must spend his days in the bell tower, for Frollo believes the world will not accept him. This is proven true in Frollo's eyes when Quasimodo is attacked during the Festival of Fools. Frollo does little to help him, as he sees the punishment as just. Later, he becomes angrier at him when he helps Esmeralda escape his grasp. Quasimodo begins the movie believing Frollo's worldview is correct, but as he experiences more of the outside, he grows to hate Frollo, seeing him as embodying all that is evil and wicked in the world.
The only thing dark and cruel about it is people like you.
As the movie reaches its end, Frollo attempts to kill Quasimodo, doing in his own words what should have been done 20 years earlier. While he is defeated, he leaves behind a young man who must now grapple with realizing how horrible his upbringing was. We give Quasimodo and Frollo this title because of how consistently bad the bond was. While the villain team-ups had some sort of camaraderie, and while the previous villains who enslaved heroes put on some facade of respect, Frollo treated Quasimodo horribly from the beginning, and things only got worse. And it's for all these reasons that we have to call this the most toxic Disney villain relationship. Alright guys, that's it. Let us know in the comment section if you agree with our ranking, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos, but most importantly, stay wicked.